Hello, everyone. My name is Ned Dennison. I'm a marathon swim organizer and swimmer from Cork, Ireland. We're doing a series of video histories, trying to capture how this relatively small sport kind of exploded, particularly in County Cork. And we have with us today Joe Donnelly. Joe, give a brief background of your aquatics and sporting childhood.
Well, I didn't have a childhood in swimming, Ned. I learned to swim. I learned to swim in my 30s. Up to that point, I mean, I had aquatically, I suppose, I had a career in kayaking, which I did for about 10 years, but I would have struggled to pass the swimming test. I qualified as a canoeing instructor, but I had to cheat. I had to cheat in to pass the swimming test that was involved, you know. So yeah, I suppose the sport I've been most competitive in would have been kayaking. I kayaked at a national level and internationally once or twice as well. But and I met a lot of friends through that. And when we finally retired or gave up our kayaking careers, we all got involved in cycling. And I was I was working outside Cork for a number of years, and when I came back, I found my cycling buddies had all started swimming. You know, I was dragged kicking and screaming into swimming. And in my 30s, I took swimming lessons, and I mean, it was my mid 30s before I could swim 400 meters. You know, so.
We had an
I'm
interview
not your typical swimming Hall of Fame candidate. You got to
We
say
had an
from the
interview
start, you know.
earlier with Stephen Black, and we talked about some of the early days of uh, Sandy Cove and the Speckled Door and Shirkin Island and places like this. And you were certainly one of the organizers of some of that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
certainly remember getting text messages from you on like a Wednesday night going, there's a secret swim on Saturday. Meet
yeah,
at
yeah, yeah.
11 o'clock at some place I'd never heard of to swim in some lake I'd never heard of, hosted by somebody I never heard of.
Well, yeah. Well, I joined Cockmaster Swimming Club as soon as I could swim. And, well, shortly afterwards, I was allowed in finally, and I was secretary of the club for about 4 or 5 years, as I recall. And yeah, so I got into hacking the Aircom, as it was at the time, their website in order to generate those texts, you know. But yeah, so yeah, I have very little history. I mean, yeah,
Do you remember the Lee swim as a child growing up in
no,
Cork?
not at all. I was completely unaware of it.
Okay. Give us
I
a
mean,
give us
it finished in '87. Well, okay, a history of it as far as we know, it dates back to about 1914. We have the central Lee Swim Trophy dates to that time, and it's kind of clouded in mystery. Although I think Terry Fleming posted a history of it on the leeswim.ie website, just a very short history. And I know that at the moment there's a woman doing a master's in history, and she's doing a history of the Lee Swim. So she is doing very extensive research into it, you know, in each individual year. But it started in 1914. It started around the North Mall. The course was from the North Mall downstream to the last bridge over the Lee on the North Channel, and it was a handicap race. And I mean, swimming was a very exotic sport back then, and there would have been like 15, 20 swimmers would have been a good turnout, you know, and it was exclusively male as well. And then there was various interruptions of that. The Second World War interrupted it. The polio epidemic in Cork in the 50s interrupted it. And it took on various formats then where it was moved, the Lee swim was moved to the Lee Baths on the Western Road in Cork. And then it moved downstream to Monkstown and Passage later on and was finally abandoned in 87. The last of that first uh, uh, series of swims was in 1987.
and
And
explain to people what handicap means, Joe.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, handicapping is it's the system that's used today with the Liffey swim, where you have to do qualifying races. There's an official handicapper who estimates how fast you're going to be, and then handicaps you, gives you you don't start on go if you've got a if you are handicapped, you don't start on go. You start at a certain time beyond, after go. So if the handicapping works, it should mean that everybody finishes together. You know, everybody's been appropriately handicapped, and they all finish with one massive bunch finish. You know, which would have been, for various reasons, we abandoned. Most of them were safety reasons. Um, I mean, it would have been impossible. This was, I mean, the first Lee swim was 2005, and having 100 swimmers, which is the kind of entry we had at the time, having 100 swimmers finish in a blanket would have overwhelmed the manual timing that we had at the time. So we had run the. I'm jumping around a lot, but we had run the. I was involved in the running of the Sandy Cove Island swim from around mid to late 90s. And we had tried various approaches there, handicapping it because that was the model of open water swimming at the time. But we failed to handicap people. I mean, we didn't know who the swimmers from Dublin were. They were less than entirely honest with their times, their submitted times, and we got people winning by embarrassing margins. You know, people who had claimed to be barely able to swim, like would finish 5 or 10 minutes ahead of everybody else. So we gave that up, and then because Cork Masters swimming was involved in the Sandy Cove swim, we decided to adopt the approach that is used in master swimming. So we have age groups, and we don't handicap. It will always be the fastest swimmer who wins on the day in the various categories, and then we have age group categories for the great mass of swimmers who follow on. You know,
There's a great story about handicapping told to me by somebody from up the country, let's say. And he was a particularly good swimmer, and he had a very severe handicap. He was sort of in 14, 15 minutes or something. And he said he was at the starting platform, and all the other people were going and going and going and going and going. And before it was time for him to get in, he could see the first one getting out at the end.
right. So he clearly wasn't going to win. Yeah.
So tell us about how the idea of resuming the Lee swim came about. Were
Oh,
you in
sure.
the
Yeah.
pub? Were you in the pub? Were you daydreaming? Were you swimming? What were you doing when the idea came in, or was it your idea?
It was my idea. Yeah. I had um, a lazy hour at work one day, and it was around the time. It was 2004, and had been announced that Cork was going to be the European capital of culture in 2005. And I was working as an engineer at the time, and I also knew that the Cork main drainage system had been completed in 2003. Um, and the European Capital Culture Cork 2005 group were looking for suggestions for what might be part of 2005. So in an idle moment, I sent off an email to to the organisers, and their response was very quick. They said, "That's a great idea. Best of luck with it. You know, we'll put it in our calendar. We'll put it in our calendar." There was no offer of support or finance or anything like that. It's a great idea. Best of luck. So that was 2004, and I was still Secretary of Cork Masters at the time, and I suggested to the club that maybe we would organise it as a club, which we did in the first year. The Cork Masters was very much involved in it.
No, don't. You
I'm
can't
jumping
skip
ahead.
over. You can't skip over the 2004
Oh,
trial
I'll get
swim,
to
Joe.
that. We'll get to that. Yeah. So, but anyway, so to go back, um, so I had this approval from the Cork 2005 committee. So where do you start? You know, and there was a few people who were very enthusiastic. A few people in Cork Masters were very enthusiastic. In fact, Tyke Philpott, who swam in the Lee in the 30s. Apparently, he was very supportive, very enthusiastic about, we should do this. And but Terry Fleming was also very enthusiastic about it. And one fateful morning, we decided we'd meet. Oh yeah, of course, Joan Lucy has to come into the picture as well. Joan was very much involved in Cork 2005 and civic events generally in Cork, and she wanted to do something for Cork 2005, and she was a swimmer, and she had indicated that she might be prepared to sponsor something. So Terry and I met her in a cafe one Wednesday morning, I think, and we met her at 11. By half 11, we had a sponsor, and we kind of walked out of the cafe thinking, what do we do now? We've got a sponsor, we've got approval. What's the next step? So we wandered down to the city hall and went in and said we want to run a swim in the river for Cork 2005, and people were looking at us blankly, like, what department do you go to? Who can give a permission for that? It wasn't the planning department. It wasn't the water services department. It wasn't the roads department. And we left the city hall again, bewildered. And Terry had this brainwave. We'll ask to meet the Lord Mayor. And I said, can you do that? Oh, yeah, we can do that. So we wandered in and we met the Lord Mayor for about half an hour, made our pitch. And suddenly it was registering with somebody. This was Sean Martin, the brother of Micheál Martin's brother. He saw the possibility, and he stopped for a second, picked up the phone and called one of the senior engineers and said, we're going to do this, and it took off after that. But then, so where do you want to go from there? Oh, yes, of course, we had to do the trial swim later in 2004. And my original idea for the course, I thought in my pitch to the 2005 committee, I said something kind of conceptual, like we would swim around the central island of Cork, emphasizing the island nature of the city and all of this, So we had gone up to the Liffey in 2004 to observe that. And my original idea for the course was we would get in at the North Mall. As the Liffey swim starts, it starts by people coming down a set of steps and onto the river, and they line up along the quay. But so that was the trial swim. We did that in 2004. There was about 8 of us, was there, as I recall?
Maybe 12, but it was more epic than that, Joe. We started down a really slippery set of algae covered steps.
Yeah.
Underneath a yellow waterfall. It's my memory.
Well, I think you might be conflating 2 different events.
No.
There was definitely a yellow waterfall in the 2007 swim, which took some time to recover from. Yeah.
We kind of did the slowest go first, and I was at the end, and I remember they were building some pedestrian bridge, and it was a wire hanging across the river.
Yes, that's right.
So I took the occasion of going over the wire, so I declared myself the only one who ever swam over a bridge. We got down to the Port of Cork sign pretty quick.
Very quickly. They were very impressive. Yeah.
And then coming back, the current was a little stronger than maybe anticipated. I remember a couple of guys by the letter E on a boat swimming for a long time.
That's right. Well, 1 or 2 didn't make it from the final turn back up because we had been in conversation, in dialogue with the ESB who control the dam upstream of the city, and communications failed because the flood that they released hadn't washed through, so it was quite a struggle to get back up, and also that course we swam that day was the original course I had in mind, which would mean that we'd swim further upstream past the city hall, which would kind of acknowledge the civic nature of it, and getting out and on the quay, Union Quay, I think. But then, so we proved it was possible. We had a sponsor, and I got a committee together. And one of the people on the committee was Pat Murphy, who was working with the guards at the time in Cork. And he had a lot of input into the final course. And something that happened coincidentally was that the Clayton Hotel was just finishing construction, and they had a boardwalk and all of that, and a perfect kind of gallery for spectators on the final push to the finish. So we shortened the course on the upstream side, and we lengthened it by going further upstream to the old distillery yard. Those were Pat's 2 ideas, and that's been the course ever since. And
The other one which you may not remember is that we were terrified about the quality of the swimmers. So we qualified or approved every single one of them. For the Dublin people who had been doing the swims in Dublin, it was pretty easy. But for the Cork people, they had come down and prove themselves. And I remember this lady and her two daughters coming down for their approval swim. And they got there. And I'll give the end of the story, which was in the end, the two daughters decided not to swim it, but the mother did. And as she came out of the water, she declared she'd be lording it over those girls for the rest of their lives. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
2005, about 100 swimmers. Uh,
Well, this was one of the big shifts in the whole organization. I mean, originally I had thought it would be a master swimming event. Well, the original idea was that it would be a mass participation event, like a city center marathon or something, where you have some elite competitors and then the bulk of people would just be there to complete the course. So I approached Swim Ireland about ensuring the event, and they required that people would be members of Swim Ireland affiliated swimming clubs, which meant with about 4 weeks to go, we had 30 entries. And that wasn't quite what I had in mind. So again, Terry Fleming had the idea. He was a member of Cork Lions Club at the time, and he said we could run it as a charity event, and Cork Lions Club could insure it. And suddenly, anybody could take part, if they were capable swimmers. And so from 3 or 4 weeks before the event, when we had 30 swimmers, we had 115 finally. We recruited all those people. A lot of it was pleading with people to take part. We needed to have some kind of event for Cork 2005. But yeah, so it took off after that, really. But we abandoned. I mean, there's so many things that have changed over the years. We abandoned any kind of vetting of swimmers, because like the big change has been in liability and insurance and all of that, and so we adopted a kind of an approach of self-certification, you know, and something as blunt as a statement that says, I realize that I'm really putting myself in danger in this, and it's my responsibility to prepare for it, and whether that will stand up legally or not. That was the thing, the disclaimer that we asked people to sign. And yeah, it's grown since then.
so just put it in context, Joe. In 2005, there were probably 20 marathon swimmers in County Cork.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
those
yeah.
marathon swimmers had earned their stripes going down a fast moving river. Today, there's nearly 200.
Mm, mm.
So, back in 2005, there weren't a lot of people that could actually swim a mile in the open without lane lines and, a line on the bottom of the pool. And today there are, 1,000 plus people in County Cork that can swim a mile in the open water relatively safely. Um, so talk to me about, we'll exchange some stories. I'll start with my first one. On the first 2005 swim, I was tucked in there in fourth place, not a podium. And as I came around the port of Corkside, I noticed that the guy in the lead had missed the turn, and he headed
Oh
down the
yes, I
river,
remember. Yeah,
headed
yeah,
down
yeah,
the river. And I thought to myself, visions of glory on a podium. Unfortunately, he was fast enough to correct his mistake after several hundred meters and come back and take it
and
from
still,
me.
still did it.
And then, but I have to tell you the best part, years later, his younger brother won the thing. And after he was there, the older brother was there, congratulated him, everything. And after the young kid had had his strut around for half an hour or so, the older brother said, I won't give the last name, but I'll give the first name. He goes, well, Seamus, he goes, you've had your moment of glory. He said, but I tell you what, boy, 50 years, they'll still be talking about me, not you.
the first, the first guy to win. Yeah, yeah. As you bring that to mind now, the day before the 2005 swim, I mean, the most I've ever been competitive in is my age group, and it looked like I was going to win my age group. And then we were so desperate for swimmers that some Finnish swimmers showed up the day before
Yeah.
and said he happened to be in Cork. He'd heard about the swim. Could he take part? So he took part, and he was in
Took
my
the
age
medal.
group, and
He
he
took
won.
the
He took the medal. Yeah, yeah. So,
And we had Father Barty Kiley. I'll let you tell that story.
oh yeah, yeah, that was. I mean, Mary O'Herlihy, who was the chairperson of Cork Masters for years and years, she had a contact with this. I'm sorry, his name escapes me now.
Bart Kiley.
Bart Kiley. He was a priest in Rome, and Mary was in contact with him. But he had actually won the Lee swim at some point. This was a man now in his must be in his late 50s, early 60s at the time, and was it higher, more? Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Apparently he had to give up swimming when he became a Jesuit priest, was one the story that
Yes,
I
yeah,
had
yeah,
heard.
yeah, yeah.
And he was the last one coming in that day. And like I'm not a man to pray, but I think there were a lot of people praying for this guy to make it, and he did.
Mm, mm, mm.
Fantastic story.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Tell us about the two guys, the mayor and somebody else, who had made a bet that they
That's
would.
right. Yeah.
I forget who they were.
One of them was one of the Crosby family who were publishers of the Cork Examiner at the time, and the other was a former city manager. Both names escape me, but one who had championed the manager who had championed the completion of the Cork main drainage scheme. Um, he had a bet with Mr. Crosby that when the scheme was finished, that you would be able to swim in the Lee. So he said, right, we'll both swim in the Lee if that's the case, you know. And on the day of the swim, they did take a little dip off the pontoon at the finish. Yeah, yeah.
And it was a great story about the trophy that appeared and was donated.
Oh yeah. So we had at the start we had two trophies. We had um, the men's trophy from 1914 and the women's trophy that was introduced in 1985. And it was a comment that you made actually, Nick. After the first one or two swims, and we're standing at the bank, and these teenagers taking all the prizes, and you said we need to find some way of giving a prize to a taxpayer. Yeah. So, so again, somebody got in contact with me, the Olivier family, Gordon Olivier, who was the son of Dennis Olivier, who was a medical student in the late 30s, early 40s, and there had been a prize at that stage for the student who did best in the Lee swim, and it was a perpetual trophy. But Dennis Olivier won it 3 years in a row and kept the trophy. But his son came back. This was what 60 years later, and presented the trophy to us and said, you must find some way of awarding that. So we had a single trophy to award to somebody, hopefully a taxpayer. And I came up with the idea of comparing the swims of master swimmers to what might be a world record in their age group. So this could be awarded to male or female. So it fitted perfectly. Yeah? So that's the Masters trophy, and or the Dennis Olivier trophy. And then a year or two later, Dennis O'Brien, the family of Dennis O'Brien, who had been he worked in the fire service in Cork and had made some epic rescues from the river as well in the course of his career. They donated a second trophy. So then we said the Dennis Olivier trophy would be awarded to wet skins swimmers, and the Dennis O'Brien trophy will be awarded to wetsuit swimmers on the same basis. Yeah. And the final trophy then was from Tyke Philpott's family. Ty, who had been so supportive and encouraging when I first thought of revitalizing the swim, they donated a trophy, and because Tyke had been so he was such a supporter of club swimming, we decided to award it to in the same way that club trophies are awarded. I don't get into that. In the same way that club trophies are awarded in master swimming, you get points depending on where you finish in your age group. We decided to award it on that basis. Is there something you'd like to say? A point you'd like to make at this stage?
Making sure that my Sandy Cove group was excluded from that on the basis of we had
They would win it. They would win it
a
every
lot of
year.
horses in that
Yeah,
race.
yeah.
I think, Joe, we have to talk about the good and the bad, the challenges. there've been a few days of the Lee swim where the sun is shining and you stroll down to the start of the swim and you've got your shirt off and everybody's happy, everybody's beautiful. The river is magnificent. Even the mullet have dressed up for the day. I mean, it's an unbelievable experience. We did have one year where it rained a bit.
You'd have to mention that now, of course. Yeah, yeah.
And so I remember it rained a bit in let's just say the conditions were a bit different. And
That was
we had,
2000. That was 2007. Yeah, yeah.
and we had 250, 300 people in that big shed at the start. We had a hurried talk with the committee. I was doing the briefing, and I stood up and I said, look, the conditions are a bit challenging today. What I can tell you is everybody on the committee is swimming. And a woman from Wexford, I won't name her name, she yelled
Yeah.
out from the
Well,
back.
there was a stunned silence for a while after
The
you
woman
made the
from the
announcement.
back
Yeah,
yelled out, "Hey, SHIT happens." And there
yeah,
was a
yeah.
nervous laughter broke out in the entire place. I think all but 5 or 6 people actually did the
Four.
swim.
Yeah, yeah.
They all came up later and said, "Oh, they should have done it." But that was the conditions were challenging from from looking down. But once you're in the water, it was grand. The other story that I remember fondly is, and I won't name any names because it probably can still get them. That after 2005, there was a party scheduled, but the location of the party was a secret, and it wasn't to be given out until after the swim.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Joan Lucy was very really had a wish there to be a social event as well, that there would be an after party, and we were trying various ways of encouraging people to stay around for that. And one of the ideas was we'll announce the party after the prize giving, you know.
so we go up to the party, and the strangest thing broke out. Something that the Irish people call a free bar
A free
broke out
bar.
at it broke out at the party for like an hour. And then I remember a whole bunch of the Dublin guys were late arriving. And they arrived after the free bar closed. And the grumbling, I remember one guy said, I've been swimming the Liffey for 35 years and they've never had a free bar. I come down here once and I missed it. It was the only ever free bar that I remember at the Lee swim. Looking back,
I
Joe,
don't remember it, but maybe I missed
you
it
were
as well.
probably late. You were doing
Yeah, 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 yeah,
results or something.
yeah.
Looking back, what are you most proud of?
Well, I guess one of the most, no, I mean, it's completely out of the blue. Is the first thing that comes to mind is, it was a charity event, which at the start I thought this is not what I had in mind. I want this to be a Swim Ireland event. The charity side of it is not my business. I leave that to Cork Lions Club. But there was one particularly inspiring, maybe you recall it. So Cork Lions Club would nominate a charity every year, and this year they nominated Guide Dogs for the Blind. And there were people around with guide dogs, like collecting from participants and spectators at the time. And I really thought, this is now more than a swimming event. This is kind of a civic event or a charity event. It's doing more in the community than simply a swimming, like a foot race or anything like that. It's.
I sold IT systems to pharmaceuticals and other places as part of living it. I'd have to tell you, I met a pharmaceutical executive from the United States, and they had made the investment and opened up in Cork or whatever. And I met him, and I asked him, why Cork? And he went through all this list, and he said something like, I could buy a small place with a barn so my daughter could get a horse, like small things like that. And he said, no, he said, when we were kids, nobody could swim in an urban river. Nobody. There were no fish. There was nothing. He goes, he said, when they told me where hundreds of people were swimming around the city of Cork in the river, he said, the quality of life scale just went
Yeah,
off the charts. Off the
totally
charts.
agree. Yeah.
Off the
I mean,
charts.
the most difficulty we've had in persuading people to take part in the swim is our Cork people. There's all this kind of preconceived notions that haven't been revised over the years. You know that the river is almost an amenity now. You know, and one of the other things I have to mention is the cooperation we get from the city council every year. You know, the drainage department and the city council, they go out of their way to make sure that the drains in the river are leading into the river are clean and fit for purpose, and they see it as rightly. They see it as an opportunity to showcase the work they've done in improving environmental standards over the years, you know, and it really should be. I'm always surprised because I still meet people around Cork who've never heard of the swim. You know, it just should have. No, it's been going since 2005, and I'm amazed that people have never heard of it and don't realize it's happening at all. It's right in the city centre. It's a big spectacle. You've got, I mean, we have, because of insurance restrictions now, we're capped at 500 swimmers, but we have close to 500 swimmers in the river every year for the last 6 or 7 years, and the only thing restricting that, I mean, how big do we want to grow it? We generally sell out, so we could have more than 500, but perhaps it becomes unmanageable after that. You know, we were hoping to grow to kind of by 100 swimmers a year to see how the systems we had could cope with those kind of numbers. But I don't know if it's necessary to do that. 500 seems like a nice number, you know.
So you've mentioned Joan Lucy and her incredible sponsorship over the years. The
Mm.
Lions Club providing a huge amount of the volunteer staff and insurance. The kayak clubs have been unbelievably supportive. You know, you're out there and you see 20, 30, 40 kayakers coming in at the end who've all given up a good chunk of their day. You know, they've always been amazing helpers as
Mm,
well.
mm, mm.
And then
And to emphasize that it's all volunteer. They're all
yep.
volunteers, like, you know. And I remember one year early on listing the number of people, number of organizations or clubs or whatever that I had to thank, and there was 21 different because it's not like in Sandico, for instance, we all show up at a pier, we swim around an island, come back onto the pier, and that's it. You know, in the city, you've got any number of different organizations. The police have to be informed, the fire brigade have to be informed, the ambulance services, because it isn't point back to point, an A to A swim. It's an A to B swim. You know, but yeah.
You've also had a huge dedicated committees over the years. You've now, I understand, you've come off all the committees and you're just a spectator or a swimmer.
I'm the spectator. Yeah, I think we were vying for who was going to be the last man standing or last man swimming for years and years. I finally conceded last year, Ned. You're still. I think you're in a club of two now. Or two people who've done all of the swims. So we'll see how that goes.
I plan my summer holidays around it. I want to give you a follow on to the Lee swim, Joe. So the number of people that was their athletic goal, the Lee swim, the number of people it was the greatest athletic accomplishment of their lives, the number of people it was the first time in their life they'd ever won a medal at anything, physical or mental or anything,
Mm,
and coming out of the Lee swim, we ended up with a Cork to Cove swim, a 16-kilometer marathon.
mm.
And I think the confidence in the quality of the Lee came from the Lee swim. In the last couple of years, we've had a small group of swimmers who have swum around the entire city. And David Merriman now is the second person to go over a bridge during a swim in the He was a little intimidated on the fact there wasn't any space between the pedestrian bridge and the water last year. So he did a foot overpass. So it's really added a huge amount to the city. And then I think the final one is you and I need to tell the story, or you should tell the story of you and I
I don't
getting
know where this
called
is going, Ned.
get called into the mayor's office who wanted us to move the swim to June
Oh yeah,
to
that's
be
right. Yeah,
part of a weekend with the Ocean to City rowing, the Lee swim, and the
and the
marathon.
Cork Marathon. Yeah,
And we had lots and lots of trouble trying to explain tides and the temperature of the water. And we were getting
Because
absolute,
this would have been early June was the proposed date, you know,
and we were
when
getting
when the
absolutely
open water
nowhere.
season has hardly started. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And we were rescued by the Ocean to City rowing group or kayaking group, who
Plus, they were
really
tidal as well.
they're convinced that the tides were everything. You just couldn't do it that
Mm,
way. But for
mm,
the
mm.
longest time, we were battling with the mayor who's just going, just get him in the water in June.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
uh, and it was an indication of how important it was in the civic calendar.
Mm, mm. Very much. Yeah, yeah.
So listen, Joe, I'm going to wind up. I want on behalf
Well,
of the.
before you do that,
Go ahead.
I didn't. I made. I should have prepared more for this. I had all sorts of structures in my head as to how we would go through it, you know. But I really want to thank some of the people, as you said, there was a very dedicated committee right from the start, and the kind of the stalwarts of that committee, or the permanent members practically of that committee from the start, have been Terry Fleming, who I mentioned already, Pascal Horgan, who was originally he was originally in Cork Lions Club. He had no he wasn't a swimmer, but now he's a swimmer, and I've I've stepped back. Pascal Horgan, Kieran O'Connor, who was really effective as the coordinator of safety, the safeties aspect of the swim. Aideen O'Leary, who everybody meets at the start. Aideen is our treasurer, but she's most visible on the day as a person who manages the registration, and she's served on the timing crew as well all through the years, you know. Joan, of course, who's been wonderful sponsor all through the years. And then there were a number of people who served on the committee over the years. I mentioned Pat Murphy, who was there in the first 2 or 3 years. Niall Cruliak, of whom you may have heard. He was on the committee for a few years as well.
Yeah.
Danny Collin, as well as I think of him. And Ozzie Schmidt was PRO for a few years. And for the last 6 or 7 years, Angela Harris has been, she really brought it to a new level on social media. Somebody commented that she was a social media rock star at some point, you know, but she really brought her own touch and energy to it, which really popularizes swim, you know. I haven't, I mean, my own open water swimming career, I think, peaked in 2006 with the Alcatraz swim. You know, I had done the Robben Island swim in 2003, done the English Channel Relay in 2005, which
Oh,
was
over and back.
over and back. Yeah, yeah. The 32 most demanding hours of my life. And I think I might have developed an aversion to open water swimming in that through that experience. You know, 32 hours of it was a combination of hypothermia, nausea, and
Physical exhaustion.
physical exhaustion. Well, the swimming was the easiest part of it. Actually, it was the rest of it was so demanding. So yeah, so I've been doing less and less open water swimming. I stopped doing the Sandy Cove swim about 4 or 5 years ago, and I think probably my last lead swim was 2020, 2022 when we brought it back after the pandemic. You know, so.
So
So
now
I'm
I'm
not your
gonna
typical. I'm more an organizer than a swimmer, really, Ned.
so now I want to take the opportunity on behalf of the thousands of people who have come down and enjoyed the Lee Swim, and potentially tens of thousands. Thank you very much for the inspired idea. Thank you for getting it off the ground. Thank you for creating a committee that's outlived you, which is really the most difficult thing in volunteer organizations is to have that committee. So Joe
Well,
Donnelly,
there's a cautionary tale that I'm aware of. I mean, one of the things I did, and one of the kind of monument events, to use a cycling term, in the Cork calendar for years and years was the Ballycotton 10 road race. You know, and it had been going since the 70s. What great event! And about 3 or 4 years ago, it just stopped because the same people had been running it for 40 years. So my hope is that there'll be new blood, new enthusiasm, new energy come into the committee as well, you know.
it will be. Thanks again, Joe.
Sure. Take care, Ned.
Bye.